Welcome back, everyone, to Full Spectrum Frontiers, the podcast where we dive deep into the complexities of national security, conflict, and the ever changing landscape of global affairs. And we break it all down in a way that makes sense for you, the average citizen trying to navigate it all. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and today we've got a big one. So buckle up, because we're about to explore something that impacts all of us, even if it doesn't always make headlines. Now, if you've been tuning in for a while, you know we like to take on some heavy topics, but we do it with a smile. Today's episode is no different. We're talking pandemics and biological threats. And I know, that's a bit of a buzzkill when you're sipping your coffee this morning, but hear me out. This episode isn't about doom and gloom. In fact, it's about looking ahead with optimism, armed with the knowledge of what's possible, and figuring out how we, as a society, can be more prepared, more resilient, and, dare I say it, more hopeful for the future. But before we jump in, a quick reminder. If you're enjoying the podcast, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and hey, share it with a friend or two who needs to be a little more in the know. Spread the love. It helps us keep doing what we're doing, bringing you these deep dives into topics that actually matter. All right, let's dive into the full spectrum of today's topic, pandemics, biological threats, and what it all means for our national security. This is more than just washing your hands, folks. It's about understanding the big picture and where we go from here. Let's go. All right, folks, let's start with a bit of a history lesson. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with dates and names. Okay, maybe a few names. But what I really want to do is connect the dots between pandemics of the past and the lessons we should have learned from them. Spoiler alert. We've dropped the ball a few times. First up, let's rewind to the 14th century. Picture this. Europe. Rolling hills, castles, peasants, and, oh yeah, death lurking around every corner. I'm talking about the Black Plague, also known as the Black Death. This little bugger wiped out roughly a third of Europe's population. A third. That's like wiping out every man, woman, and child in the entire country of Canada today. Now, imagine that level of devastation in a world where people thought bad smells were responsible for disease, and medical treatment involved leeches and, well, more leeches. So what did we learn from the Black Plague? For one, the importance of hygiene and quarantine, two concepts we'd revisit a few hundred years later during the Spanish flu and, of course, our most recent bout with COVID-19. And yes, we learned that people freak out when the chips are down. We had looting, hoarding, and widespread panic. Sound familiar? It's as if the playbook hasn't changed much, except now we have hand sanitizer in every conceivable scent. But here's the kicker. Even back then, without the technology we have today, some cities figured out that isolating sick people slowed the spread of the disease. Venice was a pioneer in the idea of quarantine, literally keeping ships isolated for 40 days. Hence the word quarantine, from the Italian quaranta, meaning 40. So, props to Venice for that one. Even in the Middle Ages, they were on to something. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and boom, we've got the 1918 Spanish flu. This one's fascinating because it struck during World War I, meaning soldiers fighting in trenches weren't just dodging bullets, they were dodging a killer virus. And this was a time when travel had evolved. Unlike the Black Death, which spread slowly via trade routes and infected rats, the Spanish flu had trains, ships, and war efforts to help it spread like wildfire. More than 50 million people died. To put that in perspective, that's more than all the military and civilian casualties in World War I combined. So, what's the lesson here? Communication, or more specifically, the lack of it. Governments back then, especially during wartime, didn't want to admit just how bad things were. It was more important to keep morale high. Sound familiar? I'm sure you remember a time when conflicting information and mixed messaging during our most recent pandemic created confusion and chaos. The point is, history has shown us that transparency, swift action, and a unified message are key when battling a pandemic. The question is, why do we keep forgetting this? But let's be real. Pandemics have been around forever. They're part of the human experience, like taxes or figuring out how to assemble IKEA furniture without throwing a fit. Yet, every time one hits, it's like we've never been through it before. We panic, we make the same mistakes, and we fail to fully use the lessons of the past to guide our present. So, here we are, folks, in the 21st century with all our fancy tech and medical advancements, yet we still have to deal with the very real possibility of another pandemic sweeping through and catching us off guard. And guess what? We're going to get to the solutions. We'll talk about how we can do better in the coming sections. But for now, just remember, pandemics are nothing new. They've been disrupting societies since, well, forever. All right, let's take a quick break before we dive into the modern landscape of biological threats. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Now that we've dusted off the history books, let's talk about where we stand today. Because if you thought pandemics were just something that belonged to the past, think again. We're in an age where biological threats are not only very real, they're more dangerous than ever. And no, it's not just the next flu strain we're talking about. Enter the world of bioengineering weaponized pathogens and, you guessed it, bioterrorism. So let's start with the big one. COVID-19. We've all lived through it. We've all got the battle scars from trying to find toilet paper at the local grocery store. But while the virus itself was devastating, what COVID really showed us is how vulnerable we are to biological threats in this interconnected, globalized world. Flights cross the globe in hours, not days, and supply chains stretch across continents. What happens in a wet market in Wuhan can impact daily life in Wichita before you've had time to Google, what is a zoonotic virus? Now we can argue all day about how the COVID-19 outbreak was handled, and trust me, that's been done ad nauseum. But the bigger picture here is that modern biological threats aren't just about nature running its course. No. They can be manufactured. Think about it. In the past, biological threats came from nature, a virus from animals, a bacterium from dirty water. But now, we've got the power to create them ourselves. And I'm not just talking about science fiction style genetic engineering. We're already at a point where countries, and yes, bad actors, have the capability to develop biological weapons that can do serious damage. And we're not just talking about a few casualties here. We're talking about engineered pathogens that could target specific populations, disrupt economies, and collapse entire health systems. So here's a question for you. What's scarier? A natural virus spreading unchecked, or one that's been designed in a lab to spread fast, evade treatments, and cause chaos? Yeah, I know, fun thoughts for your morning commute. The idea of biological warfare isn't new. Even in the ancient world, armies would catapult diseased corpses over city walls during sieges. Gross, right? Fast forward to today, and we've got scientists who, on the darker side of the spectrum, can take a pathogen, tweak it, and make it more deadly or more resistant to treatment. It's not science fiction, it's reality. The 1972 Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, was supposed to put a lid on this kind of thing. No more research, development, or stockpiling of biological weapons. And most countries signed it. That's great, right? Well, sort of. Because, like many international agreements, it's only as good as the people willing to follow it. There's always a loophole, always a country or group that's willing to exploit the gray areas. And the fact is, enforcement of the BWC is, let's say, lacking. Countries like North Korea, for example, are suspected of dabbling in biological weapons research. And we've all seen how this kind of threat can be used as leverage, as a tool for intimidation, or worst case scenario, as an actual weapon of mass destruction. Imagine a world where a rogue state, or even a non-state actor like a terrorist group, could unleash a virus tailored to inflict maximum harm. It's a terrifying thought, but it's one we have to be prepared for. And then there's the elephant in the room: biosecurity. You've got labs around the world studying some of the deadliest pathogens known to man. In theory, these places are fortresses of security, designed to keep everything contained. But we've seen mistakes happen, leaks, accidents. Sometimes all it takes is one slip-up for a virus to get out. Remember that scene from Jurassic Park where Jeff Goldblum's character says, life, finds a way? Well, pathogens find a way too. But let's not forget the elephant's cousin, bioterrorism. A pathogen doesn't have to come from a government-run lab. It could be developed or even just released by a group with the resources and intent. And we're living in a time when access to information is easier than ever. What once required the backing of a state could now potentially be done by a highly motivated group of individuals with enough knowledge and the right tools. So, what are we doing about it? How is the global community addressing this evolving threat? Well, that's where things get tricky. The problem is, biological threats are hard to track. You can monitor nuclear activity with satellites and inspectors. You can see missiles being built. But a pathogen? It could be sitting in a lab somewhere halfway across the world, or in someone's basement for all we know. And we wouldn't have a clue until it's too late. We need better global cooperation, stronger biosecurity protocols, more transparency when it comes to research, and stricter enforcement of international agreements like the BWC. The good news is that there are organizations out there trying to get ahead of the problem. The World Health Organization, for example, works on pandemic preparedness. The CDC, here in the States, is constantly studying ways to contain potential threats. But the truth is, we're still playing catch-up. What can we, the average people, do? Well, this is where it gets interesting. First off, we need to be informed. Understanding the nature of biological threats, whether they're natural or engineered, is the first step in combating them. Second, We need to hold our governments accountable, make sure they're funding the right kinds of research, investing in biosecurity measures, and staying ahead of potential threats. And look, I get it. It's a heavy topic. But this is full spectrum frontiers. And the whole point here is to look at the bigger picture. The future of conflict isn't just tanks, jets, and drones. It's viruses, bacteria, and the unseen biological threats that can cause just as much devastation. Stick around, because next we're going to dive into how well we're actually prepared for the next biological threat. Spoiler alert, there's some work to be done, but it's not all bad news. Okay, let's talk about readiness. How prepared are we as a global community to handle the next biological threat, whether that's a pandemic or a bioweapon? Short answer. We're better off than we were, but we're still not where we need to be. You see, the COVID-19 pandemic was a wake-up call, like someone throwing a bucket of cold water on the world. Suddenly, we were all scrambling to figure out how prepared our health systems really were. Spoiler, they weren't. Hospitals were overwhelmed, healthcare workers were stretched thin, and supply chains crumbled under the pressure. Remember the great toilet paper shortage of 2020? That was just a symptom of a much bigger problem. Let's break this down. The healthcare system itself is one of the pillars of national security, and when it's underprepared, society suffers. And I'm not just talking about running out of ventilators or ICU beds. I'm talking about the cascading effects. When hospitals are full, routine care gets pushed to the side. People with chronic conditions, injuries, or other illnesses suddenly find themselves in a worse position. The entire system grinds to a halt. Now, globally, the disparity in healthcare readiness is staggering. Countries with strong public health infrastructure like Germany or South Korea fared relatively well during COVID. But what about countries without those resources? Some nations struggled to provide even basic medical supplies, let alone manage widespread outbreaks. And this doesn't just affect them, it affects all of us. Because in a globalized world, a virus that starts in one country can spread halfway across the globe before you've had time to update your Instagram feed. The idea of health security might sound like a niche topic, but make no mistake, it's critical to national security. You can't have a functioning military, a stable economy, or a healthy population if your healthcare system collapses under the weight of a pandemic. And it's not just about the virus itself. Think about the broader impact on mental health, public trust, and economic stability. When the health system is overwhelmed, people lose faith in institutions, panic spreads, and suddenly you've got more than just a public health crisis on your hands. You've got a societal one. And let's not forget about vaccines. Vaccines are one of our most powerful tools in the fight against pandemics. But as we saw with COVID-19, getting them distributed fairly and efficiently is easier said than done. Wealthier nations hoarded doses while poorer countries waited in line. It's like the Titanic. Only a few people got lifeboats while the rest were left scrambling for survival. And that's not just an ethical problem, it's a strategic one. Because in a pandemic, no one is safe until everyone is safe. The longer a virus circulates, the more time it has to mutate into something more dangerous. Now, to be fair, there have been some successes. The speed at which the COVID-19 vaccines were developed was nothing short of miraculous. mRNA technology, in particular, has the potential to revolutionize how we respond to future biological threats. But let's not kid ourselves. Having a vaccine is one thing. Getting it to people, convincing them to take it, and making sure it's effective against new variants is a whole other challenge. On top of that, we've got the issue of supply chains. We rely on global supply chains for medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, and other critical goods. When those chains break down, as they did during COVID, it becomes a logistical nightmare. Personal protective equipment, PPE, shortages, drug shortages, it all happened because our systems weren't built for the kind of stress that a pandemic brings. And here's the kicker. Pandemic preparedness isn't just about responding to the crisis after it happens. It's about being proactive, not reactive. It's about having the right infrastructure in place before a new virus emerges. That means investing in research, strengthening healthcare systems, and ensuring that we have the capacity to manufacture and distribute medical supplies at scale. It means having clear, consistent communication from public health authorities so that people trust the information they're getting. Unfortunately, even though we're more aware of these issues now, it's still a mixed bag. Some countries have made great strides in pandemic preparedness, while others have fallen back into complacency. We tend to have short memories when it comes to crises, and once the immediate danger passes, funding dries up, interest wanes, and we move on to the next thing. It's a dangerous cycle, and one that we can't afford to repeat. But it's not all bad news. There are positive steps being taken. International cooperation has improved in some areas, and organizations like the WHO and the CDC are working hard to build better frameworks for responding to future threats. There are efforts to create global stockpiles of vaccines and medical supplies so that when the next pandemic hits, and it will, we'll be better prepared to respond. And that brings us to the role of leadership. Strong leadership, both on the national and international levels, is key to managing a crisis, like a pandemic. It's about more than just making decisions. It's about instilling trust, providing clear guidance, and mobilizing resources in a way that's both efficient and effective. During COVID, we saw examples of great leadership, but we also saw what happens when leaders fail to act quickly or decisively. So, are we ready? The short answer is, we're getting there, but there's still a lot of work to be done. The good news is that we have the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to be ready. The bad news is that it takes sustained effort, investment, and a willingness to learn from the mistakes of the past. At technology, it's that double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it's given us Netflix, smartphones, and self-driving cars. On the other hand, it's made everything from cyber warfare to bioterrorism a very real threat. But when it comes to pandemics, technology is not the villain. It's our most powerful ally. And if we're going to win the battle against the next big virus or biological threat, tech is going to be front and center. Let's start with one of the most important developments in modern medicine: rapid disease detection. We're living in a world where AI can analyze health data in real time to spot patterns that we humans would miss. Ever heard of Google flu trends? Back in the day, Google tried to predict flu outbreaks by analyzing search queries. It wasn't perfect, but the idea was groundbreaking. Use the internet to track the spread of disease in real time. Today, we've taken that concept and run with it. We've got AI systems monitoring social media, news reports, even Google searches looking for clues about emerging disease outbreaks. Imagine if we had something like that before COVID-19, an early warning system to alert the world when a virus starts spreading. We're getting closer to making that a reality. Then there's the genetic side of things. Thanks to advances in gene sequencing, we can now map the genome of a virus in a matter of days. During the COVID-19 pandemic, scientists were able to identify the genetic code of the virus almost immediately. And that's a game changer because once we know the genetic makeup of a virus, we can start developing treatments, vaccines, and diagnostics. In fact, the COVID-19 vaccines that rolled out so quickly, they were based on mRNA technology, which allowed scientists to design the vaccine as soon as they had the virus's genetic sequence. mRNA tech is like a cheat code for pandemics. It allows us to create vaccines faster than ever before. But detection is just one part of the equation. Containment is where the real challenge comes in. And this is where technology steps up again. Contact tracing apps, for instance, were a major tool in the fight against COVID-19. Countries like South Korea and Singapore used mobile apps to track the spread of the virus and alert people if they'd been in close contact with an infected person. Sure, there were privacy concerns. No one wants Big Brother knowing where they've been, but the trade-off is clear. If we can use technology to stop the spread of a virus early, we can save lives and prevent the kind of lockdowns that cripple economies. And then there's the future of telemedicine. We all got a crash course in virtual doctor visits during COVID-19, but telemedicine is just getting started. Imagine a world where AI-driven diagnostics allow doctors to remotely monitor patients for early signs of illness. Think about wearable tech, like your Apple Watch or Fitbit, but cranked up to 11, monitoring not just your steps or heart rate, but key indicators of viral infection. Your watch might know you're sick before you do. That's the kind of tech we're talking about, and it's already on the horizon. Let's not forget about the logistics side of things. Drones, robots, and autonomous systems played a huge role during the pandemic, from delivering medical supplies to disinfecting public spaces. In the future, we could see entire fleets of drones delivering vaccines or medication to remote areas, bypassing traffic and infrastructure issues. It sounds like science fiction, but it's closer than you think. But, and there's always a but, technology alone isn't enough. For every advance we make, there's a counterbalance of ethical questions, challenges, and potential misuses. Surveillance tech used for good during a pandemic could easily be turned into a tool for oppression. AI systems monitoring disease spread could misinterpret data, leading to false positives or unnecessary panic. And while mRNA vaccines were a huge success in the fight against COVID-19, we have to be careful with how we wield that power. Just because we can do something with technology doesn't always mean we should. So, where does that leave us? In a world where technology is both our greatest hope and our biggest challenge when it comes to future pandemics, we need the tech. There's no doubt about that. But we also need to be smart about how we use it, and we need to make sure that it's accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy or the well-connected. Because a virus doesn't care about your tax bracket, and in a pandemic, everyone needs to have a seat at the table. let's dive into something a little more philosophical, but just as critical: ethics. When we talk about pandemics, bioweapons, and the role of technology in both, we can't avoid the ethical dilemmas that come along for the ride. This isn't just about what we can do, it's about what we should do and where we draw the line in biological research. Let's start with the obvious: biological. Research is, on one hand, one of the greatest tools humanity has. We've used it to develop vaccines that save millions of lives, treatments for previously incurable diseases, and an understanding of how to live healthier, longer lives. But like any powerful tool, it can be used for destruction. And that's where the ethical tightrope comes in. Biological research has the potential to go dark, very dark. Weaponizing diseases, enhancing pathogens, and experimenting with the fundamental building blocks of life itself brings us to a moral crossroads. Take CRISPR, for example. This gene editing technology has revolutionized medicine, giving us the ability to edit DNA with precision. In theory, we can eradicate genetic diseases, boost resistance to infections, and maybe even tweak our biology to extend human life. But, yeah, here comes that but again. CRISPR could also be used to create superbugs, enhance bioweapons, or genetically modify organisms in ways that have unintended and potentially catastrophic consequences. This brings us to bioweapons and their role in modern warfare. Look, humanity has a long history of using whatever is at its disposal to gain an edge in war. We've seen everything from mustard gas in World War I to nuclear bombs in World War II. And while the use of chemical and nuclear weapons has been more strictly regulated in recent decades, the realm of biological weapons is murkier. In 1972, the Biological Weapons Convention, BWC, was supposed to stop the development and stockpiling of bioweapons. And while most of the world's countries signed on, we know that there are still states, and probably non-state actors, pushing the limits of that agreement. Now, I'm not here to accuse anyone, but let's be real. The temptation to develop bioweapons is hard to ignore. Imagine being able to deploy a weapon that could silently sweep through an enemy population without a single bullet fired. It's the ultimate asymmetric warfare tool. But here's where it gets scary. A bioweapon doesn't stay neatly within the lines of a battlefield. It doesn't care about borders, and once released, controlling it is almost impossible. It's like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. Good luck. This brings us back to ethics. The line between legitimate biological research and bioweapons development is razor thin. Take dual-use research, for example. This is research that has the potential for both good and harm. A study aimed at creating a more virulent strain of a virus could be done to understand how to defend against it, or it could be used to weaponize that virus. The intent behind the research matters, but once the knowledge is out there, it's hard to control how it's used. And let's not forget about transparency. In an ideal world, all countries would adhere to the BWC, there'd be no secret labs, and everyone would play by the rules. But as we all know, this isn't an ideal world. There are always going to be actors, whether they're nation-states, terrorist organizations, or rogue scientists, who don't play fair. So how do we enforce these ethical boundaries? How do we ensure that the tools we develop to save lives aren't being twisted into tools of mass destruction? The answer isn't simple, and that's why we need strong international oversight. We need organizations that aren't just toothless regulators, but have the power and the will to enforce these ethical standards. We need more transparency in research, better global cooperation, and stronger treaties that can actually be enforced. And we need to have these ethical discussions before the technology gets too far ahead of us. Think about AI for a moment. We've had years of debate about how artificial intelligence should be developed, what the limits are, and how it should be used responsibly. But when it comes to biological research, that same level of ethical scrutiny is lagging behind. We're already capable of creating genetically engineered viruses and editing the human genome, and we've barely scratched the surface of the ethical implications. If we don't set the rules of the road now, we're setting ourselves up for some serious moral and potentially catastrophic dilemmas down the line. But I don't want to leave you all hanging on a note of doom and gloom. The good news is that we, as a global community, do have the power to navigate these ethical challenges. It starts with awareness, with having these conversations now, and with making sure that the organizations responsible for overseeing biological research are equipped to do their jobs. It also means that, as citizens, we hold our governments and institutions accountable. Transparency, regulation, and cooperation aren't just buzzwords. They're the foundations of a world where we can harness the power of biological research for good without crossing into dangerous territory. So yes, the risks are real, but so are the solutions. It's all about making the right choices, setting the right limits, and understanding that with great power comes great responsibility. And yes, I just quoted Spider-Man. Deal with it. All right, folks. That's a wrap on today's episode of Full Spectrum Frontiers. We've covered a lot of ground. Everything from the lessons of past pandemics to the cutting-edge technology that's helping us detect and contain the next big threat. And of course, the ethical challenges we face in this brave new world of biological research. If there's one big takeaway from today, it's this. While pandemics and biological threats are nothing new, our ability to respond, adapt, and overcome is stronger than ever before. But we've got to stay vigilant. Preparedness isn't a one-and-done deal. It's something we have to keep working on, from global cooperation to ethical decision-making, and yes, even figuring out how to use technology in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few. I want to thank you for sticking with me through this episode. These are the kinds of conversations we need to be having, and I hope you leave today feeling a little more informed and a lot more motivated to stay engaged with the world around you. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about understanding the threats we face. It's about recognizing the solutions we can be a part of. Before we close out, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. And hey, if you liked what you heard today, share this podcast with someone who might need a little nudge to think about these issues too. You can also leave a review. It really helps get the word out and keeps this show growing. Thanks again for listening, and as always, stay informed, stay prepared, and keep pushing forward. This is Bennett Tanton, signing off. See you next time on Full Spectrum Frontiers.
It's just you, me, and the odds. We stuck together, we two peas in a pod. You dealt a bad hand, I'm there seizing the cards. We'll never be separated till we see in the gods. We've been low together, high forever. Long as we go together, we'll die whenever. Be your light, couldn't let the darkness try you ever. Truth in my word, you I lie to never. And when the world gets a little too hard, wipe your eyes, put away your sorrow. When it's war, I'll be leading the charge, and I'll be still fighting for you tomorrow. Yeah, even with a zones. Could find my way to you with my eyes closed. There's nothing between us. Go to Mars and Venus. Stand in front of every one of them rocks they slinging and be a shit.
You're a shield.
Yeah.
In the